Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm on the edge of my chair because Socks is he's got most of my armchair and he's not moving. Today I'm thinking about Halloween. It's July still. It's the 21st of July, but I'm thinking about my reading pile for October. Is this weird? I don't think it is. I think it's nice to plan ahead. I've been slowly building this pile of spooky books that I want to save for the darker nights. At the moment, we're in the middle of this peculiar summer. Today is grey and blowy. Yesterday was slightly sunnier. It poured down the day before, and it was roasting hot the day before that. So I long for kind of the consistency of a different season. But it's just fun, isn't it, making piles of spooky books? Although I do want to. I'm reading spooky things at the moment anyway. I'm still reading this Dark Forces middle grade book that Rosie found for me. The game, the one about the twins and one of the twins being in a wheelchair, and the Ouija board. It's great fun. It's really spooky and silly. Anyway, so my pile of Halloween spooky books. I'll show you what I've got so far. I'll probably read them before. First of all, here's something that's like an ex-library copy. It was sent by a friend years ago. I've read it before. And it's an anthology from, I guess, the 1980s. With people like Robert Westall and Joan Aiken and Antonia Barber. That's interesting. And Alison Prince, who wrote a fantastic biography of Hans Christian Andersen about 20 years ago, I remember. It's got a story by Philip Pullman. I really went off Philip Pullman, I have to tell you. I know everybody loves Philip Pullman. I loved Northern Lights. I liked the second one. But by the time we got to the third, I'd gone off him. Not least because he'd not been terribly nice about a book of mine in print, which is a bit of an odd review in 2002. And it can really put you off someone. It's terrible, it shouldn't, but it does. Anyway, Cold Feet, which is, I'm wondering if they're all kind of contemporary set. I'm not sure they are. They've got titles like The Video Nasty, so maybe it is. I love these library copies, not least because they sometimes have the little tickets and things inside, or somebody's pulled this one out. Anyway, so that's on my list. This is a similar one, the Methuen book of Sinister Stories, which I might have talked about before. Something else that came from a library in the 80s, and it has spooky illustrations by Tony Ross and stories. Again, we've got Joan Aiken, which is brilliant, Adele Guerras. These are properly reliable people to have in an anthology, I think. Vivian Alcock, Jean Kemp, Robert Swindles. Whenever I see Robert Swindles and his name cropping up, I know it's going to be good. He's somebody that I've read without even thinking about it. He was kind of everywhere. One of those names in the 70s and always in anthologies. But I can't think of specific titles of his I've read. I'll have to look up what I've read by him. So that looks great anyway. Look at that on the back. Right, here's another one, a similar kind of idea. The Skylark Ghost and Monsters stories. I've read this as well. It's a book club edition. So this is from 1980. And people like Barbara Slay, Helen Cresswell, Ruth Manning Sanders. I'm smiling because these are names that you just recognise from that era. There's a bit of The Hobbit as well, Riddles in the Dark, Tolkien, and the scene from The Hobbit where he meets Gollum for the first time, I guess. That's a nice excerpt to have. See, these things were chosen so skillfully by people who knew and understood books. Look at these illustrations. This is the book that contains the story about the Nonsuch as well. about the mermaid. Look at Gollum. This is a fantastic book, actually. £2 at some point. I got this from a library sale or somewhere. The Nonsuch Story is by Richard Davis, who of course was an anthologist. I think it's the same one who edited the Armada book, or books of science fiction stories. Right, so that's collections of stories. Here's another collection, an American anthology, Shadows Over Baker Street, which I've had forever, I've dipped into, but for some reason I have a hankering both for Sherlock Holmes and H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know what the Lovecraft thing is about. I suddenly remembered when I did my MA at Lancaster, the group of us who got on best, there was about 5 of us, carried on doing workshops for the full year or 2 after our MA. We kept meeting every month and having dinner around each other's houses, which is quite a feat because we lived in different cities. We carried on. And one of us, Joan, lived in Kendal, and she lived in a house on the high street, and she had this boyfriend, Bob, who was wonderful. He looked like somebody out of a fantasy adventure. He had red hair and a beard, and he was kind of slightly hobbity in this tiny living room. And I remember him sitting there by his bookcase, and we had this workshop, and somebody had mentioned the word tenterhooks, as in I was on tenterhooks. And somebody questioned it and said, I wonder where that phrase even comes from. And Bob, who was listening in the whole time, pointed out of the window of his dining room in Kendal and said, up there. And we all thought he'd gone crazy, but he hadn't. He was pointing over the rooftops and at the hills beyond Kendal. And apparently Tenter was the place where tenterhooks came from, and it was about hanging up the skeins of wool, or the sheepskins from sheep. And that's where that phrase had actually originated. And we were all amazed and kind of humbled after worriting at this word. Anyway, Bob's bookcase was a miracle in itself. It was all these 1940s and 50s and 60s first editions of, I think, Arkham editions, those kinds of books, H.P. Lovecraft, and all of his followers, and all of those dark fantasists, the weird tales kinds of people. And I remember poring over those that evening, because we all stayed in their place in Kendal, and just being amazed by these wonderful spooky old books. And I've read a fair bit of Lovecraft over the years, not masses. It always makes me feel a bit icky for all sorts of reasons. But I thought I'd like to go back to that kind of spooky Edwardian world. And this has been waiting for a long time, this book of Sherlock Holmes meets H.P. Lovecraft, written by all sorts of people. So that'll be interesting to I'm recognising lots of names I know again already. I think they were written especially for this. I'm not sure how they fit together. This is 2003, it's over 20 years ago. I bet I've had it more than 20 years. This is what you do when you have space and you have bookcases and you have a kind of mood reading, as they say, way of looking at things, that you end up with books and it can be 20 years before you get to them. But that's all right, you know, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do what you want. And I got this the other week, remember, when I was shopping in Stockport, and it's this illustrated copy of Holmes stories. I thought it was a kind of best of. It's not. It's The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. It's the whole volume. Beginning with, of course, A Scandal in Bohemia, one of my favourites. So I thought I'd go back to the world of Holmes. What else? An issue of Pulp Horror, which I've read, but I've gone over these again and again. This is from the same people, I was going to say, but I think it's person. I think it's Justin Marriott does the whole thing. He still edits, a magazine called Paperback Fanatic, which I love. I haven't got all the issues over the years. The last 15 years or so, I've kind of got odd ones. But each one I've loved and read again and again. He's obsessed with the kind of pulp fiction that I love. And even the things that I've never heard of before, I love hearing about them. The tie-ins of Frankenstein. I should be in this. I'm just thinking about that. I wonder if he does Never the Bride and Brenda. Maybe not. And it set me off on all kinds of searches for elderly paperbacks on eBay and in bookshops and all over the place. This is a particularly good one, this whole kind of pulp horror thing. There's things about fanzines as well. Anyway, so I'm going to return to this and maybe catch up on some issues of Paperback Fanatic, the spookier ones. It's just the reprints of covers make you hanker after these books. What else? I want to read Dracula again. This is for a very specific reason that I can't even talk about. But I got myself a sweet new copy of Dracula because, as I might have shown you before, the one that I've had all my life since I was about 15 is an Arrow paperback from the 50s, and it's got the most hilarious cover, and it's the one I took away to college with me, but it's falling to pieces. It can't be read again. It would just fall away like autumn leaves. That's hilarious. They've got garlic and a stabby stab thing on the back. I can't even read what that says. Oh, the children of the night, what music they make. And an Arrow paperback of Dracula's Guest, the extra story that's always cut out. These I cleaned up, these old paperbacks, just using hand sanitizer. It was an accident in the first place, and I realised that you take off decades of muck with a touch of hand sanitizer. In fact, the other day I found my ancient copies of some Dennis Wheatley novels that I loved 20 years ago, and they were already 50 years old, these paperbacks, and they've been out in the beach house, they've been in the attic, they're covered in filth, and I cleaned them the other day. Hold on. And they came out really lovely, almost like new. This is where somebody tells me that, oh, you don't use hand sanitizer, that's got alcohol in and that makes the books dissolve upon reading. But they do feel new and shiny. Not shiny exactly, but at least not, not filthy, as paperbacks can go. I love this cover, The Haunting of Toby Jug. This is the most ridiculous book. They filmed it very seriously on the BBC and called it The Haunted Airman. And they mostly stuck to the story, except it's a kind of Lovecraftian story. He's paralysed, or at least incapacitated, in bed, and he's in a cell, and there's a window with a strip of light showing a bit of outside, a courtyard outside he can see. And every night something settles outside his window. It has long, thin, hairy legs, and it can either be a giant spider or an evil octopus, and it dances on his window ledge. And it's the most horrifying thing he's ever seen. And I forget what happens after that. What I remember most is the dancing, hairy octopus, as you would. This is a collection of Mary Danby short stories, which it was bought as a present for me by a lovely fella called Ian, who was in the same Doctor Who book discussion group online that I was in. A really lovely group that went for a number of years. It's very welcoming and sweet, and a bunch of us used to meet up every now and again. I'd see them in London. And Ian died a few years ago, out of the blue. I didn't know him well, but there was one point I remember I was doing an event in somewhere in London, and he turned up and he'd been to a signing for this book, And he knew I was a massive fan of Mary Danby's anthologies from the 70s, the Fontana books of horror, the ghost books for Armada, I think she edited, and she would slip in one of her own stories at the end, very modestly, in all of these volumes, and every time the best story in the collection was by Mary Danby. No questions. If it wasn't her, it would be one by Rosemary Timperley, and that would be amazing as well. So they collected together in about 2012. Yes, this fellow Johnny Maines collected together all the stories they could get their hands on and involved Mary Danby. She writes an intro, and this copy is actually signed. So this lovely fella Ian brought me this gift of a signed copy. I think there was only 150 copies of this, all in all. So I've dipped into it over the years, but this autumn I'm going to go back to Mary Danby and read some more of her stories altogether. And a spooky Nancy Drew, which I picked up recently with a pile of Nancy Drews in Stockport from the 1980s. And this one's called The Witch Tree Symbol, and it's clearly spooky, which is good. And that's that pile is as high as my knee already, and it's only Julyween. I'm sure there'll be more spooky things to be added to it, or I will get through these, and October won't even be here. Anyway, let me know what you think about the wisdom of starting the spooky season early. I think the changes in the weather are making me seek out the supernatural and the spooky. Yep. Okay, I'm going to go back to my books. Today I want to finish the game by Les Logan in this series. I want to crack on with this Batman, Nightwalker by Mary Lou, which is terrific. I've got a real Batman thing going at the moment. Our friend Darren from down the street gave us his old DVDs that he was getting rid of because I've lost my Batman films. I don't know where they've gone. So Saturday night, we had a Batman marathon of the first two Tim Burton movies, which were just even better than I remembered. So I've got a real Batman thing going on at the moment. And I want to finish this Sweet Home Alaska that I'm still on with, which is the Little House on the Prairie, but in Alaska in the 40s. I think it's the 40s. That's really sweet. And the kids in it are raising money to create their own small library because they've got nothing to read in the wilds of Alaska. They haven't even got tents yet of their own, certainly not a house, but they're looking for books, which is very endearing. So that's my my afternoon. I've written my words today. You'll be glad to know, 1.5 thousand words. So I feel like I'm getting somewhere. I'm winning. Maybe that's overstating it. Anyway, I missed a day out of doing these videos. There was nothing new today on Monday. So maybe this is me starting to space these out a bit more and not do them every day. Yes, I'll be sensible. But I'll still be here every few days, if not every other day. Okay, take care, and I'll see you again soon in the next episode.